All right. Christopher Nolan has come out with another epic movie yet again. But is it too epic for its own good? I think it's a little bit confusing, and it's so confusing to the fact that it's very complicated to really comprehend the movie. But what do you guys think?
I think it's definitely ambitious. Like, his most ambitious film yet, in the way that, like, I feel like he didn't really think about, like, what the audience would think of it. He was just, like, putting his own creative ideas out there as, like, a passion project, is what it felt like. Felt like very personal to his crazy mind.
I think that, yeah, definitely this movie is very, very confusing. I do think that it's sort of a movie. I kind of look at this movie kind of like a jigsaw puzzle, where it's like, if you understand how to solve it, it is sort of rewarding to solve it. But at the same time, I do feel like as a jigsaw puzzle, it didn't really didn't do the best job of giving you instructions on how to solve it. It just assumed that you would figure it out by just playing with it a lot. And I can see how that can be very annoying and frustrating to certain people, especially considering that the jigsaw puzzle itself seemed to be the main thing of the movie.
I
and
like
every
that
other
analogy.
Aspect of it. Yeah.
I think that's an apt analogy, because it's like, jigsaw puzzles aren't for everyone. And if it starts getting a little too complicated, you're going to kind of get bored and start thinking about other stuff. And maybe it will take you out of it. The fact that you have to, like, look at it as a math problem in some areas of the film.
Yeah, I think that for this film, going into it, I was definitely like on that same line as far as like, because it's a Christopher Nolan film, right? We have our experience with Christopher Nolan films, and from the trailer we were like, okay, some crazy stuff is going on with time. So me personally, I was going in with like, okay, I need to make sure I like pay attention like 110%, and I catch as much as I can. And I was going into it with that mindset of like, I'm trying to piece together this puzzle, and like with that expectation. So I think that my experience going in there with that understanding might have been different from somebody who maybe like there are people who are not so familiar with Nolan's films, or are not like in that type of mood to be confused for 2.5 hours.
Yeah, the casual moviegoer audience.
Yeah, maybe they may not have understood, or not even understood, but just like flat out didn't enjoy that kind of movie because they weren't expecting that kind of movie.
Okay, so this is where I guess there's a slightly disagreement to certain things. Like, I do agree that Nolan's films, for the most part, are very they're very like they're not a movie you just go in. Like, it's sort of a thing where the story kind of unravels itself the more you continue watching it, and it has that perspective where you rewatch it, now you have a different lens. I understand that. I just felt like with this movie particularly, and I enjoyed it to no degree. Like, I enjoy it and I want to rewatch it for sure. But I definitely still have the frustration where I felt like this movie, it could have did a little bit more, did a better job in showing you what the rules were, did a better job setting it up than the way it did. Because I felt like, especially with the sound where you couldn't hear anything, and then the fact that the movie is very dialogue focused, and then not to mention that with this film itself, like, most of the movie, the whole point of the movie, again, like I said, a jigsaw puzzle, like it's all playing up the concept of this whole, reverse time and the Tenet and all that stuff. So for the movie to have that be extreme focus, and the other side stuff or the action and cinematography, which are great, but don't really have any emotional relevance to the story, and the whole story is about us understanding it, and then people still having a hard time understanding it. It doesn't, to me, that's where I have sort of a issue with it. So in that terms of merit.
Let's bring something into the discussion, because I feel like there are there's complexities on two different levels with this movie. There's complexities as far as the concept that the movie is based on is pretty complicated, and then there's complexity as far as the plot itself. So the plot itself, Okay, so we can talk about the plot where it's like, and minor or major spoilers depending on how far we go the discussion. So basically, the whole setup is that the protagonist character basically has to go through all of these steps. Like he has to meet this person and do this thing and steal this thing and then crash this plane in order to meet this guy. Like all to like get into contact with the main villain character, and like all of those different things. In the first half of the movie, like in that whole setup, it's kind of easy to get lost. Like there are a lot of times where I was like watching the movie thinking, okay, I know what we're doing here, but I like barely know what we're doing here. Like I understand like, okay, they're trying to get this painting because that'll give them access to this man's wife and all that stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And you have to like really be paying attention, but because if you miss a thing here or there, you're like, why are they crashing a plane into a building? For what reason? Like that can easily like go under somebody's radar.
Or the fact, I just found it funny the fact that they're talking about that in front of public people, but nobody cares for whatever reason. But continue.
Well, yeah, it's like all of those things, and it happens like really quickly. Like people talk pretty
fast.
And so I can understand like getting confused on that level, and this movie essentially becomes a bunch of people doing things without you really understanding why they're doing anything that they're doing.
Yeah. And that was like one of his creative choices, was to make it so that like this time around for this movie, because it's so like spy story centric, he wanted like all the characters to be like in and out of there. Like, here, I'm telling you objective. Like you don't even have to understand this, just do it basically. And it's like there are characters that come and go and we don't even know like what their backstory is or like how they got involved in the project. You know, like the scientist woman, like the very first person to kind of expose the protagonist to the idea of inversion. I mean, the whole exchange was like super clipped. And like they kind of glossed over the whole concept of inversion too. So it's like, and then right after that, like we're jumping back into like the whole project of like meeting the wife of the antagonist. And then it's like, you know,
I think
blink
that's
and
what
you'll miss
made
it basically.
Yeah. That's definitely what made it confusing for me, because for me, I wanted a more like in-depth explanation of how they were doing this, because time travel is so mathematical in general. It's a science. And it wasn't really explained to me. So when they started doing things, I'm like, how are they doing that? Or like, what the heck is going on? At one point during the movie, I turned to the person that I was watching it with, and I was like, dude, I have no idea what's going on. And he laughed because he had no idea what was going on either. But other than that, like the cinematography is amazing. It's pretty dope, but in terms of like plot and story, I feel like it's a little bit lacking.
It's funny that you mentioned that about like your friend not knowing what was going on, because I watched it in theaters twice now, and like both times I went, like my boyfriend just like out of nowhere would be like, what? Like, what's going on? I can't understand that. And then like the second time I watched it, like a stranger was like, what? Like you could audibly hear people being confused. And it's like, that's not going to come out of just anyone unless they're like actually frustrated about not knowing where things are going. And it's like, you know, I'm glad you like mentioned the cinematography and like the actual like movie making. I think technically it is a masterpiece, and like I appreciate that Christopher Nolan has the confidence in moviegoers to like give such like a convoluted story to us. I appreciate it, but it's like it is kind of hard to reach that satisfaction when you have to like have a hyper focus throughout the entire film, basically.
Maybe that's how he wanted it to be. Maybe he wanted people to watch it to ask the question why, and also like what's going on, so that it makes you watch it again.
He wanted them to watch it twice and get more money.
Yeah, exactly. So this may not be the movie for you.
I think it's important to explain. I guess because again, I had to look up a bunch of YouTube videos as well as like had people explain to me, like my brother, what the whole, I guess the concept of what was like going on for the plot, right? So from my understanding of it was that eventually people in the future, they end up creating that whole reverse time thing, or inverse time. That's a better way to explain it. And then afterwards, I'm assuming that people wanted to use it to like end global warming, things like that. Fortunately, the person created felt that it was too dangerous. So they send it back. They try to send it back in time. And the way they send it back in time with pieces was, I'm assuming, from the inverse. But then those people who wanted it also sent stuff back in time. So that created this kind of a convoluted conflict thing where eventually
you already lost villain, me.
Oh, sorry.
This is very apt of the movie, basically. Like,
yeah, but my point is, I guess understanding, even when I understand it, I still had certain questions. Like, for example, how does the inverse thing work? Because from the way the movie was told for us was that with the inverse time thing, that it's not like you go back in time, but it's not like you're actually like, you're like the way you're human, like, for example, like if we went back in time, like in 2015, the way it would work is that we would go 5 years. We would still age 5 years going back in that time.
Like the same rate that we would be going forward, you're going backwards. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what they explained it to me like that. But so that's the theory they gave me. But then it just led me certain questions. Because, like, for example, there's a theory that, oh my God, I can't even say his name right.
Neil?
My God, Neil. Yeah, the theory with Neil and that he's technically the kid. Now that makes me curious in terms of like, so does that mean that in 10 years did the protagonist beat him in 10 years, and then in that 10 years that he met them, Neil had to like go another 10 years back in time, so he grew even older just to meet that kid or be in that time period?
Well,
no, that Neil, now we're getting into the weeds with this, but basically like that Neil would be like a new Neil, or like, you know, so it's not like he'd be old.
I mean,
plus the first Neil is dead, by the way, so I don't know what you mean.
So he's talking about the Neil that was Max. So yeah, we're getting into the weeds of the movie, but basically the whole theory states that like Max / Neil is the son of the main villain and his wife. And basically at the end of the movie, the kid is safe now, and I'm assuming that like in a couple of years he meets the protagonist and he gets a master's in physics, and then he like learns all of this stuff about inversion from the protagonist, who then starts sending him back in time, and he probably does a couple of missions until he goes all the way back in time to that point at the beginning of the movie.
That's the theory.
Yeah, that's the theory. I mean, I don't know. They never explained his age, but I guess my issue with it, like, let's take for the example with the whole global warming thing, right? Because like the whole theory was that people were going to use it to stop nuclear warfare or global warming. I'm just curious on how that would have worked for them, because the way it works is that you're going to have to, even if you're going back in time, let's just say that they were going to save themselves, right? Like for whatever reason, they figured they will just inverse back to the time period where the global warming was stopped or whatever, right? I don't think they would be able to live, if that makes any sense. Like they would be dead because they would have to degrowth. They're still growing. So that's the thing where I'm just confused in terms of like, what was the whole plan on that? Like, why were they like, I mean, it sounds like a good motivation, but then like execution, how did they like where did that come from?
No, you're right. That part was open-ended because the plan never succeeded, but also that kind of was like explained or not really explained away through the grandfather paradox, where it's like it was a gamble basically by the future. Like it could work, it could not. I mean, they just went for it because they were desperate. So
I guess, but I don't know. I felt like if they already discovered in that time period, whatever, how inverse works, I feel like they would have had the common sense to realize that wasn't going to work, you know? Because they already discovered based off that time period that the way inverse works is that you can't de-age yourself, right? So it's just like, that's the thing where I'm just kind of conflicted in terms.
I think they're talking about like reversing like global warming, right?
Yeah.
So I don't necessarily know if they're all concerned about their own personal age, as far as like are my kids gonna have a world to survive in, or my grandkids gonna have a world to survive in, like stuff like that, where they know that they'll get older, but the fact that the world will be saved, that might have been like enough for them to like sacrifice their own life in order to have something for their future.
I guess that sort of makes sense. I guess it makes sense in that motivation. I guess I'm just confused in terms of I guess that's where the debate in the movie comes in, where it's like,
right. Granted, I've only seen it once, and I know that I will understand it more like each time I see it, and I definitely want to see it again. Like, I enjoyed watching it the first time. I thought that like I had fun watching this movie. I had a lot of fun.
I have to watch it again for sure, because I didn't understand most of it, and I want to understand it so that I can like it. But my general thoughts and census on the movie is that shit is confusing as hell.
It definitely is.
Yeah,
it definitely is.
It has definitely a high barrier to enjoyment, which is kind of like the unfortunate part of the film. But it is fun to watch, like the spectacle of like, the heist parts and the fight scenes. The choreo is great.
It's a great concept too. Like it's a great
super
idea.
Creative. And I mean, like, there's other reasons why it was confusing. I mean, we could barely hear the people talking, like we said before. Like, the sound mixing's kind of strange. A lot of characters have accents on top of that, or they have accents and they mumble. So it's like kind of
not to forget, some people talk backwards as well
and
at some point.
People
So
straight talk backwards. So it's a lot. It's a lot to take in. It's kind of a sensory overload, but it's still fun. Christopher Nolan took it really seriously, but it's still fun.
The theory that makes sense for me for this movie, and this is where I guess me rewatching it's going to have a more impact, is I think of it, the best theory to look at is from the time loop theory, and that everything that happens in the movie is meant for it to happen so the movie can begin. So it's sort of this weird, like, you can almost create the reason why the protagonist is called protagonist is because it's a metaphor saying that he becomes the protagonist. So it's this weird, that's the best way I can describe it. Like, if you just look at it as just one big time loop, it makes sense within that narrative or that framework. But if you take out the time loop, then it just seems like it's just some random, like, then you forget, well, how did this happen? But if you look at it as a time loop, then it makes sense why this character talks to this character, because he needs to talk to this character to create the event that happens before. So,
I think they confirm that in the movie too, because it's like, it's kind of a weird, twisted idea of like fate, where even Neil, he kind of knows he's going to die, but he says out loud, like, it's my responsibility to do this. We can't leave some things to chance, even if we try to change it. But it is still like optimistic. That's the main thing is, that's why they're doing what they're doing to survive.
Yeah.
That makes sense. So right now, Tenet is like at a 73% on Rotten Tomatoes. As much as Rotten Tomatoes is relevant still, what do you guys think about that? As far as like, because it's not a bad tomato score, but it's not at necessarily the same level as his other films, as Nolan's other films.
I think Inception started at that score though. At the very beginning.
That's what I was gonna say.
Really?
Mm-hmm. Like when it was in theaters, it had the same like kind of lower score.
Yeah.
Okay, so
we don't
that's
know.
kind of what I was thinking, because I was like, I'm curious if this movie will kind of get better with age. That as we spend more time with it, and maybe as people begin to understand it more and theories kind of get out there and people have fun with it and play around with it, will it get like to the level of an Inception that we like currently hold in a movie like Inception in such high regard? I don't know. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I definitely, of course, obviously, once it gets better in age, people are going to enjoy it more, understand it. But I guess the thing about it is, like, I feel like unlike Inception, where the concept was more easier to grasp, like they're in a dream world, so it's like a lot of things.
To say. It's weird to say that Inception was easier to grasp than Tenet, but yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, but like
to me, it was easier too.
And that one was pure fantasy. I think they tried to merge fantasy with science this time, which was kind of. You know.
Yeah,
it clearly was. It's just it's a testament to, and I said this like after watching, it's a testament to how creative and imaginative Christopher Nolan is.
Yeah.
It's like 10 years ago when we watched Inception, that was like the craziest concept and the craziest thing, and like, is he still in the dream? Is he not in the dream? And then now it's like, oh, that's easy. Like back then when people, like, everybody was like, you know, half the people were confused, half the people got it, and now it's like the same, but like it's even crazier.
I think it's cool that Christopher Nolan is like continuing to push the envelope, raise the bar on our IQ, and give us these huge, you know, projects. I think it's cool.
Yeah.
I agree.